Hello and welcome to this latest installment of NIMSY's live event series. I'm your host, Tucker Johnson, and today we are looking at the impact of generative AI on the language services industry. We are going to be diving deep into why linguists are already experimenting with generative AI tools, how large language models are reshaping everything from translation to creative adaptation, and why leadership needs to catch up, not just in technology investment, but in vision, training, and alignment. Joining me today is the brilliant Marina Pantcheva, a localization strategist and thought leader who's been shaking up the AI conversation with her recent article on nimsy.com called Ready, Set, AI, which I'm going to be referencing throughout this conversation. If you are a NIMSY member, NIMSY partner, feel free to go over and follow along on nimsy.com and find the article Ready, Set, AI. In this piece, Marina pulls no punches. She highlights a startling reality. Employees are often way ahead of leadership when it comes to AI adoption, and the localization industry is no exception. We'll also be unpacking her framework for understanding LSP readiness, evolving expectations of localization buyers, and the all-important human element, the linguists in the trenches who are already using AI and who are waiting to co-pilot the AI transformation. If only someone could give them the controls. Marina, thank you so much for joining us today. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. You are the person to talk to about this. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me again.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
It has been a while. You're no stranger to the show. You've been on here before, but I'm looking forward to unpacking this article with you. Ready, Set, AI. Tell us a little bit about the generation of this article. What inspired you to cover this topic, and what were some of your findings from it?
Well, I was inspired first by an observation that there is some sort of a misalignment between AI implementations, which are coming top down, and the needs, which are coming bottom up. So often I've seen cases where new AI powered features are released in the tools, and then linguists don't really use them the way they are intended to be used. But at the same time, linguists are using AI in a different way than envisaged by tool developers and engineers. And I always thought that the reason for that is because linguists think like linguists, and they are entrenched in the nuances and complexities of language. And engineers think as engineers. So they have a more mechanical understanding and this reductionist approach to language, which they try to convert into an engineering problem. But then I started thinking more about it, and I actually think there's more to it. Leadership, strategy towards innovation also has some role to play here. That's why I started exploring the topic, resulting in this article I wrote for NIMSY.
Well, and one of your findings in here is that AI is affecting. This is not like some of the big technology innovation crises in our industry, or the oh my god, we're all going to lose our jobs type, that we go through every 5 years in our industry, that people kind of freak out about, because this is technology and that's not specifically affecting the language services industry. You're uniquely affecting language in this industry. It's a with generative AI, it's affecting the way everybody does business, not just localizers, and that kind of there's a lot of overlap there, because generally when there's new technology that comes out or new innovation, it affects our industry in one of two ways. It either affects how we do the work that we do with localizing, or it affects the input. It affects our stakeholders' input, and therefore what we're translating, whether it be volumes or content types or whatever. This is doing both. Right. So it's kind of unique in that regards. And it's also unique in the regards that it's very accessible. And you talk about this top-down strategy versus bottom-up strategy, whereas typically the barrier to entry with implementing new technologies means that there's a lot of investment needed from a company in order to start rolling out, defining a strategy around it, going to RFP, picking vendors, all of that stuff. Well, anyone can go sign up for a ChatGPT account. So what we're seeing is, the junior project managers and the translators are adopting technology at a pace that outpaces the rate at which senior management can define a strategy around it. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Oh my good. Tucker, there was just so much you said, and I want to interrupt you about 100 times to just react to what you were saying. So there's a lot to unpack here. Let me start from your first statement, and that is that this is a new type of technological revolution which affects everybody. This is true. It does affect everybody, even though you'd be surprised how many people remain untouched by AI. I happen to meet some of them. I'm shocked myself. How come you're not using GPT? But yeah, there are still people out there which are immune to the AI hype and they don't actually use it on a daily basis. But generally, you are right. AI is really disruptive technology and it affects everybody. I think the future generations will simply not imagine their life without AI the way we cannot imagine our life without our smartphone and whatever social media, right? But there are professions which are more affected than others by AI. For example, according to a recent report, EU report, 7% of jobs are so-called highly exposed jobs, where the impact of AI is much stronger than in jobs which are not so highly exposed. For example, teachers, education, yeah, they can leverage from AI, but it's never gonna really replace them in the way that translators are afraid that AI are gonna replace them. Translation industry and language, anything connected to processing language at large volumes, is certainly highly exposed and strongly affected by AI, specifically large language models, because large language models are about the language, and language is what translation is about. So we have really a topic here that needs to be discussed openly, representing all perspectives, because there is something to be solved. The way I look at this AI translation, juxtaposition is not that AI is gonna replace translators really, but the I think meaningful implementation of AI is to have AI process or do work that currently is not being done at all, or that can be mechanized, like that can the drudgery of the translation work, but still keep the human creative element at the very end of the process. For example, we can use AI to solve a problem lots of clients have and content creators have, and that is terminology. Terminology remains for decades the biggest pain in the localization process because it's time consuming. It is difficult to constantly extract terminology from new content that is being generated and having control over it. But with AI, one can turn terminology extraction and updating terminology databases into a much, much easier process that is continuous and constantly feeds the translation process and localization process with new updated terminology instead of having to go back and do terminology implementation in millions of old TM segments, right? So use AI for terminology extraction, use AI for generating instructions, providing context to translators. But if you want to use AI for translation itself, you got to be very careful because it's not all type of content that will fare well, and it's not all type of segments that will fare well. We should not forget that AI hallucinates. That's part of its nature. That cannot be, you can never be 100% sure that there won't be a hallucination. And this has to be taken into account.
It couldn't agree more. And I kind of have my own answer to this question, but I'm very interested in getting your input on it. You touched upon it. AI hallucinates. There's some things it does well. There's some things it doesn't do well. Can you just give us, in your professional opinion, what are some of the things? Because now we've had a chance to play around with AI, and this is what I've been saying recently: is that a year ago, when I'd have a conversation or do a podcast with someone talking about AI, we were looking at PowerPoint presentations. Nowadays, we're looking at demos and solutions, right? We've had a chance as an industry to play around with it and actually create some solutions using generative AI. And what have we found out? What have you found out in your professional experience? What does AI do well? What are the good use cases, the viable use cases? And what does it not do well? And were there any surprises that you've come across in the last couple of years as you've gone through this journey?
So there are lots of things that AI can actually do well if instructed properly, if you develop a really rich and well-managed workflow, but not 100% well. You can never, even with humans, you cannot count on 100% accuracy and perfect output.
Sure.
So AI is really good at extracting terminology, for example, because it's good at summarizing large volumes of text. It is very good at extracting the important features out of a text, which is terminology. It is very good at also processing really large amounts of uh, language data, for example, segments in a TM, and converting them in a well-specified way. So, for example, you give it a set of terms and you give it a set of segments, can be millions of segments, and you say, make sure that all the terminology is correctly implemented in those segments. If not, then do the change, preserving grammaticality and sentence structure, and so on. AI is also very good at providing creative translations if prompted well. Well, to me, the best way to use AI, and that is something that lots of translators, the people who work daily, with the content tell me, is use AI as a brainstorming partner.
Hmm.
Uh, what I find is a kind of a bit of a paradox is that lots of tools get enriched with AI features, and those AI features suggest translations, or they do AI post editing of machine translation, like something that provides the translator with one solution. This is a segment that is polished by AI, converted by AI, generated by AI, whatever. It's one segment. But the way translators actually use AI in their daily work without being specifically instructed, so this is spontaneous usage of AI, is for brainstorming. They go and say, give me 10 possible translations for this segment. And then I'll take those elements out of those 10, which I like best, and recompile them into the one perfect translation. Tell me more about what this source segment means. So they use it as an assistant, not as a tool to produce translation, neither as a tool to estimate the quality of an existing translation. They actually use it as a buddy with which they kind of exchange ideas. And together, they come to the optimal translation, especially for marketing, for translations where you need some puns, for rhymes, lyrics translation. This usage of AI is very, very popular among the translators.
Yeah. And,
But notice, there is always the human who decides in the end
right.
which ideas to take and compile the perfect translation.
Right. And it is very similar to how I, for example, have been using AI just to generate content. And it's not that I'm feeding something into ChatGPT and just taking the output, but I'm still in control. I'm still writing the content, but I'll put something in there. I'll train my little prompts and everything. I don't know the terminology, and I'll get out some an output, and I'll say, yeah, I don't like that very much, but it'll give me some ideas, right?
Yes,
And
exactly,
it's that
exactly.
brainstorming partner you're talking about.
One more thing, one more type of usage of AI, which I find cute and kind of surprising. I always like to play with a comparison between what AI can do and what a purely mechanical check or a script, some hard-coded piece of software or just code can do. Okay, and one very interesting example where I think the benefit of using AI is very, very clear is language identification. Right. So suppose you have lots of segments and you need to identify source text. Okay. And you need to identify what is the language of this source text.
Mm-hmm.
There are Python libraries, there are scripts which you can run, and they have been developed for years, so they can give you very good results, right? They will say, well, it's 98% Norwegian and 70% Swedish, and I don't know, 2% Swahili. Okay, this text, and then you go for the highest percentage. But there are lots of cases where source segments actually have mixed languages. Imagine you have German source, but you have placeholders which are written in English because these are, say, English product names. And then you may have a case where you have 50% of the words in that source segment in German, and 50% are simply English placeholders, right? These are technical elements, but they are in pure English. So your Python library script will tell you, well, that's 50% German and that's 50% and 50% English. So you have a tie. But if you ask that question to an LLM, the LLM figures out that the meaningful elements, which are not code, but these are the meaningful, semantically important elements in the sentence, are German, and the elements that are in English are actually code technical elements. So it will correctly tell you, well, this is a German segment, but it just contains some technical English, placeholder values and tags there.
Hmm.
And this is something that purely mechanical and kind of script-based Python code cannot tell you, because it cannot decide. It doesn't evaluate the context and everything associated with that, whereas an LLM has this, in a sense, linguistic common sense to identify that a segment which contains 50% German words and 50% English placeholders is still a German sentence.
Yeah, lots of applications on that. One that I can think of is, a challenge that's faced the interpreting space, like OPI space for a long time, is that someone calls into a call center speaking a foreign language. It's like, okay, before we can even get an interpreter on the phone, we need to identify what language they're speaking, whether it's in a healthcare setting or call center setting. And, this is going to solve that problem if it hasn't already. For sure. Which kind of takes us to, and you've touched on this already a little bit. Who's leading the innovation here? And our industry, the localization industry, is no stranger to innovation, but it's always been kind of a curiosity to me where that innovation comes from. And I've said before, and I kind of still stand by this, that LSPs are just have abysmally small R&D budgets. So it's really hard to see innovation coming from the LSPs, not for lack of trying, not for lack of intentions and stuff, but when it's a technology or an innovation that requires a lot of upfront investment, whether it's building a massive data set, training an engine, investing in technology or data centers or whatever has been, LSPs are usually pretty hesitant to make that upfront investment. So what we see in the machine translation space, for example, yes, LSPs can be considered experts in using machine translation and training engines and stuff, but the actual engines are developed by Google, Microsoft, Amazon, the big ones that we use every day. And I'm kind of seeing that right now with the LLM space. But let's talk about what is the role that vendors play in this innovation. And I liked how you broke it down in your article, AI readiness amongst LSPs. You kind of classify LSPs into three categories: the innovative leaders, who are tech savvy LSPs who invest in AI infrastructure, tools, training. So these are the ones that are actually investing themselves into AI and experimenting, research and development, essentially. Then you have the cautious implementers. So these are the people that are experimenting with it. They're not sold on it yet. They're not ready to go whole hog into the AI space. They're still very concerned with quality and more traditional localization practices. And then you have the third category, which is aspiring adopters. So this is the larger group, and you would argue that the largest group of LSPs falls into this categories. These are people that are interested in AI. These are people that I'm sure are probably talking about AI in their pitch decks to their customers and their prospects, but not quite there yet as far as actual tangible results and solutions that are coming out. Can you talk us through how you came up with these categories and how you see this play out in day to day in the biz out there?
Yes, well, so I came up with these categories through observation, because I'm monitoring what's happening in the industry, going to conferences, talking to people. I have a pretty large network of people with whom I have the pleasure to exchange ideas. And what I would say is that typically the level of maturity and innovation in the area of AI more or less corresponds with the size of the LSP, and therefore the budget and the ability to have the luxury of maintaining some R&D group. There are exceptions. There are small size LSPs that actually have a research groups within them, like research dedicated units. Those are the unicorns. Those are really forward-thinking LSPs that invest in research. But generally, typically, the tech-savvy LSPs are those that also have their own tools, so that they have the teams, the developers that already have the technical knowledge to simply kind of reprofile and turn to AI and start exploring AI. Usually those also have very big clients. And we must remember that LSPs and clients are connected vessels, right? These are not two isolated systems. It's part of one ecosystem. So when big clients come to LSPs with a requirement to do something about with AI, that's a very, usually it's a bit vaguely defined as we want to use AI, tell us how you use AI, we also want to use AI.
Yeah.
This induces a process that goes from both sides. Like LSPs invest into technology development, their clients are curious and mature and brave enough, and they have the budget to experiment, so they help each other. But every LSP is aware that AI will be part of their technology toolkit. That is clear. I mean, everybody in the language industry is clear about it. But there are some LSPs that are more cautious because they don't trust AI that much. Sometimes that is because they have very specific clients who also are not very advanced technologically, right? So they are, for example, handing off once a month content in the form of kind of discrete units of, here you have the files, translate them, they get them back in batches. Whereas there are clients, large clients that have no touch processes, files are just flowing through APIs back and forth, right? Yep. These are two different scales of maturity. So cautious implementers are curious about AI. They usually experiment with AI in small, well-limited projects. Let's say, let's use AI for trying, marketing translation. Very often they just need to use tools that are available, on the market. So let's use like GPT, for example, or a Copilot. Lots of LSPs actually try simply using Microsoft Copilot, which is integrated in Edge, for terminology mining and so on. But my maybe a bit subjective impression is that using the frontier models straight from the provider, ideally by connecting through an API, not through a chat environment, gives you the real thing. Right. The results there are much more robust and solid. But for that, one needs an engineering team to support that solution.
Yeah, fortunately, I mean,
and data analysts.
And data analysts. So there's a little bit of a barrier there, but it's not impossible for LSPs to invest in the right hires and the right expertise and actually connect directly to via APIs or whatever in order to do that. But you got to start somewhere, essentially. So kudos to anyone. I'm not trying to disrespect people that are going through the agents. That's fine. My question is...
But can I stop you here?
Yes.
I just want to comment. You said invest in the right hires. I wish one could. The problem is worse. You have to nurture these people because they don't exist. What we need here in our industry is a fairly rare combination of people who have a lot of technical background, and they can communicate, talk the machine, speak in a way, but they also have linguistic acumen.
Right.
And this is not a very frequent combination. So linguistic prompt engineers, if you post a vacancy, you will not get hundreds of applicants because those people need to be trained.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Fair enough. And I would add to that by saying, and this goes back to the challenge of why LSPs, in my opinion, often fail through no fault of their own, I would say, but they fail to lead with innovation and R&D is because that profile is such a specific profile that, I'm sorry, most LSPs can't afford that person. They're in really high demand right now. Why would I go work for, a $50 million LSP when I can quadruple my salary and go work for Google? Right. So it's really challenging to find those people. If you can find them, can you afford them? Is the next question, right?
Yes. So we have a shortage of talent. Plus, whatever position has AI in itself, it's usually the expectation for remunerations go by, say, 10-15% higher.
Right. Exactly.
Because it's
So we talked about LSPs. Next in your article, we go and talk about buyers. So, but before we go into your article, I'm going to go off script a little bit here because we're talking about LSPs, we're talking about buyer side. There's also this third category of language technology companies, right? And I'm very curious. One thing that I think about is as this, you know, technology matures and becomes more mainstream, and we stop talking about AI in the context of innovation, the next thing, and just more of a matter of fact, this is the way life is now. Where is that responsibility to manage the AI going to land? Is it going to land on the client side? Is it going to land on the vendor side? Or is it going to land on the Lang Tech, like the TMS company side? Or are we going to see like another category of providers prop up? So I'll preface this by saying, like, based upon my experience and history, I would say back in the day, there were clients and LSPs, and those LSPs often developed their own TMS systems, cat tools, whatever, and they sold it as part of their service, right? In the last decade or so, the TMS as a third party um, category has really exploded. You can see that in the NIMSI Technology Atlas, right? There's so many different third-party TMS systems that they don't do services and translation, and they're just a third party. So nowadays, it's very common for a buyer to contract with an LSP or multiple LSPs and contract directly with a TMS provider, right? Do you see in the future a third category where a buyer will be contracting with an LSP, a TMS, and someone to manage their generative AI? Or do you think that generative AI responsibility will fall into the scope of the LSP or the TMS provider?
So I think that first of all, if I am to simplify the question, I think that
Please.
it will be within the scope of the LSP.
Okay.
Okay, because the
Really?
LSP is ultimately responsible for the quality. It is not the TMS owner that is responsible for the quality of the translation that is being delivered to the client and exposed to the users. It is the LSP. So this organization has the vested interest in getting the best quality out there and is sensitive to issues and thinks about how to eliminate them. Okay, but I think that the way you kind of describe it as three different entities just contracting each other, you know, in a supplier-client relationship, is not the optimal way to work. It is a collaboration. So the client is as much responsible as the LSP to solve any AI-related problems, as well as the TMS provider as two, right? So the three entities must work in collaboration. And I know of many very good examples where an LSP and a TMS provider actually collaborate and they help each other. So the LSP will come up with ideas for feature enhancements that help the TMS provider improve their product, but it also helps the LSP improve their quality, increase efficiency and productivity. And it's a symbiotic relationship, similarly for the client. However, there is a possible future development where we will see a shift of responsibilities because some clients decide to go independent and they say to the LSP, actually, with AI, we don't need you anymore. We are going to do our own translations using AI.
But
Now,
we're already starting to see that.
We are seeing that.
It's happening more than people realize because people aren't shouting from the rooftops about it yet. But just knowing what I know, talking to people in the industry, is this is the direction some of the companies are going out there.
Exactly.
And I know you know this too, and I know we both have NDAs, so we're not going to talk too much about it. But this is a direction that is at the very least, it's being explored by the buyer side.
Exactly. And I won't be commenting on the results and the quality of those endeavors, right? But I think generally AI is improving by the day. The newer model, they have enhanced capabilities. They get better. They simply get better. You can see that, you know, with every model, Sonnet 3.7, so much better than 3.5. GPT 4.5 is better than 4. So we are going to be getting more and more fluent language, you know, maybe better vibes, as the GPT now has the vibe and the emotion, right? But I don't know. My concern here is the um, I don't know whether that's a word, AIification of language. At some point, users become sensitive to the AI flavor of language,
Yep.
which, if you get exposed to it a lot, you actually start sensing it. Recently, I was discussing with a colleague the fact that before, when GPT 3.5 appeared, everybody was stunned. Wow, this thing is so intelligent and it speaks so well, right? It masters language fluently, even though it had some issues, right? It couldn't do the Vinograd schemas and resolve ambiguous pronominal anaphora or whatever, right? It had some linguistic issues. As the models were getting better and better, we as users adapt. So we are not anymore impressed by the fact that GPT 4.5 produces hyperfluent language. Oh, we
Mhm.
know they can. Now we are annoyed by the fact that there isn't enough variability, that there is repetition,
Yep.
that sentences have the same length, and that it sounds a bit dull. Okay, so our criteria get higher and higher, the better and better the models are.
Yeah. So shifting expectations. So yeah,
Exactly.
it's getting better, but we're coming to expect more of it. So it's playing catch up constantly. But you bring up a good point: is that um, our industry is no stranger to change, and this is a change for our industry. I would make the argument that what makes this different is the rate of change. The rate at which the technology is improving is astounding. From every update that's pushed, the quality, the output is noticeably different, and it's kind of scary. I don't want to say scary, but it's
Yes.
impressive. Let's say impressive with it.
Yes, but there are still edge cases that AI cannot handle, things it's not good at. Let's say it gets 95% of the things right, but there are still those 5%. And when they go wrong, they can actually go very
Oh yeah.
wrong.
Oh yeah.
In a way that we didn't have it wrong before. So when you have a hallucination, even if it affects just 0.02% of the segments that were translated, that hallucination will result in a critical error.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas before, you could have, like with humans and with MT post editing, you can have, let's say, I don't know, 10% of your segments having some issues, but those are issues that users can live with. It would be a typo, a missing comma, extra space before an exclamation mark. Now with an LLM, if you have an issue in 0.02% of your segments, then it's a bad issue.
Yeah, yeah. And
And
so
that's
the need for quality control is still there. Like I don't see a way out of that. We're going to need that human in the loop, and it's something that's been discussed. It's being discussed all over the place right now. So I want to move on to the client side. So we talked about the vendor side.
let's
We
go.
talked about, I kind of took us on a tangent on the lang tech side. Now let's talk about the client side. In your article, the heading here is, are localization buyers in a good position to implement AI? Short answer is yes, comma, but, right? There's a lot to go on here. Talk to us about. Talk to me as if I'm a buyer of localization services. I'm on the client side, and my boss has told me we need to look into generative AI. We need to do more with less. We need to leverage existing technology and stay ahead of the curve. Blah blah blah. All of that stuff. Where do I begin? What do I do? How do I approach this?
Okay, so where you start is education, either external or self-education, because this is where everybody has to start with education. And by education, I don't mean just, read a few, blog posts about what AI can do and what AI cannot do, but actually read more solid trainings, prompting trainings, try to understand how AI really works and what the issues are. When you have some background in AI, then you can start talking to your leadership. What exactly is the goal, right? Really, because sometimes my observations are that there is this request coming top down to implement AI for the sake of implementing AI, as if AI is simply a checkbox
Right.
that needs to be checked, and it doesn't really matter how exactly you use it. So
Right.
one has to really think about, where is this going to bring us value? What exactly do we want with AI? What is the vision?
And I've seen that too, right? I'm sure you as well have read RFPs that states something like, tell us, question number 37, tell us about how you plan to implement AI. It's like, to do what, right? It's the wrong question. I understand it's the good intentions, right? But the question should be like, here's a challenge. Can this be addressed with AI? Should this be addressed with AI? And then how can this specific challenge?
Precisely. Exactly, because in addition to those RFPs with these kind of generic questions, tell us what you do, how you plan to implement AI. What I've seen is use AI to do XYZ manipulation of our assets, when XYZ are perfectly well manageable with just simple non-AI powered tool, because actually you don't need AI to do that. Right? You don't need AI to find out where you have exact mismatches into segments. This is a simple regex can give you that. Why use, a cannonball to shoot a sparrow? So maybe that was a bit of an aggressive metaphor, but yeah.
This goes back to like, I've managed automated processes before when working for LSPs that shall not be named. The client thinks they're getting an automated process. What they're actually getting is an offshore team in a low-cost center. Right? It's like sometimes automation makes sense, sometimes it doesn't make sense. Nowadays, you could apply that same reasoning to artificial intelligence. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't make sense.
Yes. Yeah. So, but moving on the steps towards a meaningful AI integration, right? Once we have knowledge about what AI can do in the first place and where it is meaningful to apply it, then we need to align on the vision with the leadership, so that it's not just implement AI for the sake of, checking that box, but actually help us deliver better quality, be more efficient, satisfy the users better. And then more training is necessary, because once you know what specific AI implementations you are after, then you need to learn about that specific area, right? So if it is creative translations, you will have one direction to educate yourself in. If it is, for example, manipulating data, converting, segments from one form to another, normalizing language, or generating data, then this is a different type of activity which requires reading simply different articles. And then one needs to start with the incorporation of AI in existing tools and infrastructure. And this is where the really painful process begins, because typically the task to use AI in localization processes is assigned to a localization team on the client side, or any side for that matter. Localization teams usually consist of people who join them for their love for language. These are linguists, philologists, sometimes these are copywriters, marketers, but usually these are not developers. Developers are not your usual localization team member, right? But now they need to be tech savvy. And sometimes this creates a vacuum. They don't know how to start with implementing AI in technology because they don't have access to the code. They don't write code. And this vacuum is then filled in by an engineering team who comes in and says, oh, we just did it for you. Here you have AI translates. And they really did it.
Yeah.
And AI really translates,
yeah.
but not in the way that would satisfy all the quality, stylistic criteria, terminology, and so on, the whole complex process that the localization team needs.
Well, it's what I've said many times, and if people that have watched past NIMSY episodes know that I repeat myself all the time, is that in general, there are exceptions to the rule, but in general, language companies suck at technology, technology companies suck at language.
Yes,
right? And that's why there exists this language services value chain or ecosystem where there's this separate niche for technology providers. Because let the tech nerds be tech nerds and let the language geeks be language geeks.
But they need to talk to each other.
They do need to talk to each other. True.
The tech nerds and the language geeks need to find a language to talk to each other, which is not always easy, because the tech geeks speak one language and the language nerds speak another language, and sometimes
Yep.
they just crosstalk and they don't understand each other.
Yep.
There are ways to crack it. One of the ways, I mean, it's an anecdote, but one of the ways, which my favorite, case is that when talking to an engineer who is like really an incredibly talented genius type of an engineer with a very abstract, non-verbal thinking. At some point, I said, look, this is like really very abstract. I understand, the gist of your thought, but I want to understand the details. What exactly do you want me to do? Write it as a prompt. And when it's a prompt engineer, when that prompt engineer actually wrote the prompt to me, I said, just imagine I'm an LLM, right? So the prompt was
Treat me like a robot.
clear. Yeah, I was like, okay, now everything is clear, because simply we found the language that works for both of us. So we communicate through prompts, because that's a structured language. It's still natural language, but it's structured in a particular way. So it is good both for a linguist and for an engineer to communicate through prompts. Works very well. I recommend it.
I like that. I'm gonna use that. So let's go back to our workflow, starting out with AI integration here. Rethink infrastructure in schools, embrace data. Talk to me about data hygiene and preparation.
But I'll just say one more thing about infrastructure and tools.
Please.
One of the things that I have noticed is that sometimes we have our tools, we have a TMS, CAT tool, whatever that was developed 10 years ago, and now we want to enrich it with AI features, and they don't quite fit. So we coerce them somehow, make basically technical compromises. Sometimes it might be better just scratch it all and build a new tool.
Interesting.
Don't try to adjust. Don't try to just squeeze it in. Sometimes you may actually have to rethink the whole workflow and build it from scratch.
Well, this is going to be painful. Yeah. Anyone that's ever managed a TMS migration project knows how hard it is to rip out a technology and replace it with something else, even if the benefits are clear. But, it's been my observation that a client needs to be in a lot of pain in order to completely rethink their technology stack. Right. And this is probably what we're going to be seeing.
You can use AI to do that conversion, right? Because you have language assets, which you may have to reformat or like reprocess your whole terminology, translation memory database. So you can actually use AI to help you with that.
Yeah. And this is opening up whole new opportunities for like machine or for TM cleanup. Oh my gosh. Like how many people have 20-year-old translation memories that they don't trust because there was a 5-year period back 12 years ago that they didn't have a good vendor or whatever. There's lax quality control. So their whole TM is suspect. They don't trust it. Well, now we have a really good use case to bring in LLMs and AI and clean up that memory. So now that we can actually trust it again. It's been a big barrier to a lot of people from rethinking their strategy.
And this is one excellent example for how we can use AI not to replace translators, but to do something that was absolutely unimaginable before.
Right. Exactly. It's not that it's taking a translator's job. It's just that previously it was not feasible to do that. Now it is. Yep.
Okay. This leads us directly to data hygiene and preparation, because basically what we have is a lot of data, and I actually look at language assets as data. And in order to make any AI process, any prompt work well, you need to have clean data. Let me give you an example. I like giving examples, simple examples, so that people understand, when I say things that they are not that abstract. Imagine you do a team cleanup, okay? Taking that as an example, and you want to run an LLM and ask the LLM to tell you whether the translation of a particular source segment is a good translation, whether it has an issue or it doesn't have an issue, okay? So you take your, let's say, English-German TM cleanup, English-German TM, and you run a prompt and you say, tell me whether, the translations are fine, and report the segments where you see an issue. Now, suppose that your English-German TM is polluted with French segments that just appeared there 5 years ago due to a temporary technical issue. They were like wrong record, or you have Vietnamese there or whatever. We've seen all sorts of languages. If you ask an LLM, tell me whether the translations are good translations for the source segments, and it goes over like German, 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 then Vietnamese, but it's an okay translation, and then it continues German, German, German. It will not report you the issue that this is the wrong language. It will say, this translation is perfectly fine. It's an excellent Vietnamese sentence, right? You never asked whether it was the right language. A human will report an issue and say, wait a minute, this is not German, because humans have common sense. LLMs, unless you ask, is that also the right language, will simply not report that because they don't have that common sense. Which is why, this is just an example for me to explain that when you have your TMs, they have all sorts of issues, sometimes totally unexpected issues, and you have to keep them in a good form. And one way to do it is to basically do an AI TM cleanup, because a human TM cleanup means months of work, maybe sometimes even years, right? And for that, you need your data to be in a very good shape. That means your TM segments must have the metadata so that the LLM can extract information of, say, what product a segment belongs to, whether it's a UI segment or a help content segment, whether it's marketing. You need to have your terminology database in a very good condition. We just ran one activity today. We finished it, and I was talking to the prompt engineer, and she said, look, actually, the results are much better if we don't use the terminology RAG to inject into the prompts. And I'm like, how is that possible? Always when we inject terminology, the results are much better. The answer was, well, the term base has such a bad quality that, in fact, it's kind of pushes down, the performance of the LLM because it brings a lot of confusion there. So the problem is the terminology database. Style guides typically contain about 80 pages of mutually exclusive rules, right? Sometimes mutual exclusivity is by design because you have one section which is about how to translate AI segments, and another section is 60 pages lower down, how to translate marketing, and they are to be handled in a completely different way. But style guides are not something that you can feed into an LLM and have it make sense out of it. You need to convert them into a very well-structured set of rules, and those rules must be formulated like instructions, not explanations. Style guides for humans are usually explanations why the human must do something. It's as if we're trying to convince the translator that no, it's not a good idea to have spelling errors in translations. Please avoid spelling errors. For an LLM, you need to give a specific instruction. Use informal address, full stop. You don't even need to be polite, even though it helps to put please in your prompt, but you just go direct. Do this, do this, do this. So, and this is all data, and clients have a lot of data. LSPs also have the data. Sometimes it's the LSPs which manage the style guides and the terminology and the TMs. But in order to have good results from AI implementation, these data sets must be put in a good shape. And that is 50% of the success. 50%. And it is, according to 50% of the success comes from the quality of the data that you inject into your prompts. The effort, I once did just for fun, a calculation in a TM cleanup activity, how much time it takes us to actually prepare the data, and how much time it takes us to prepare the prompts, run them, iterate, evaluate, and all that or other type of work. Well, from the overall effort, 46% exactly went for data preparation, data analysis, partitioning, vectorization, all that beauty. And the remaining 54% were the prompt work, the evaluation of the prompts, and all those final polishing touches. So data is key.
So my takeaway is, however much time I think I'm spending crafting a prompt, I'm not spending enough time on it. That's where I need to invest my time. A well-crafted, providing well-crafted prompts and well-crafted data is going to pay for itself.
Right. So if you want to improve the LLM performance, sometimes you craft a better prompt. Sometimes you go back to your data and to actually
Yeah,
fix the data or partition it differently or prepare it differently
I
or
th-
enrich it. You may want to enrich it.
yeah, I think that's I'm conflating those two in my mind because when I'm thinking of prompt, I'm thinking of data, providing the data into the LLM, and then crafting the prompt, right?
Okay.
And
Okay.
then
Yeah.
telling the LLM, please only use my data. don't don't make up
Yes.
your own data. Please only use my data.
But that's the right thing because it's not like you work on your data and then you work on the prompt. The two are intertwined.
Yeah,
As you prepare your data,
exactly.
you enhance your prompts, you iterate, and these are basically the two sides of the same process.
Exactly. Well, and let's get to the last step. Don't forget quality control and compliance here. So I think we've kind of touched on this throughout the conversation, but it warrants its own explanation here.
Yes, because here there is always a risk when using AI that AI can hallucinate. Also, we know that AI can exacerbate bias. I mean, that bias is present in all language data that we have. That's how it acquired it, right? It is our own bias that we see reflected in AI, but sometimes it can go bad, right? So, one of the important things for AI implementations is to put the guardrails, processes that can capture. Whenever things go astray, and a quality framework. Probably the most difficult thing is to catch bias and hallucinations because LLMs don't hallucinate in a well predefined way. They can come up with anything, unimaginable. They can do like things you don't really expect. That's why it's called hallucination. So having the checks ready for any possible type of hallucination is kind of difficult because it's a sea of possibilities.
Right. Well, I'm watching the clock here, Marina, and I think we could keep going for another hour, but we
I
gotta.
didn't notice so much time elapsed. That
Uh,
was a very nice conversation. Yeah.
I told you I'm gonna try to keep it to half an hour, but even as I said those words, I was like, this is not gonna be half an hour. There's too much to talk about. I mean, we've covered, this idea that Gen AI is really something that there's a lot of grassroots developments coming up because it's accessible. So no matter where, it's not something that needs to come from senior management. It's you can start using it as a junior project manager, as a translator today, right? We've covered the role of the language services providers and the different, approaches that LSPs are taking to it. We've covered what you can do on the buyer side here. The main takeaway is regardless of your position, your job title, your goal in life is if you're not using AI, then why not? You should be. This is the future, right? Don't be afraid of it. Move forward with it. If you're afraid of where to start with AI integration, start today. Align on the vision, grow in your maturity, train and develop your people. Take a look at your existing tech stack, your existing technology infrastructure. Um, don't be scared of the fact that you might need to throw out everything and start from scratch, completely redevelop everything. Prepare your data and make sure that you have that human in the loop to keep the quality. And I think that kind of summarizes the conversation. What did I leave out here?
You left out the most important thing, and
Of
this is
course.
like about the human in the loop. I am not a very big fan of the human in the loop. I like to have human in the cockpit or human at the start because I think what's most important when you want to integrate AI is go and talk to the people who are gonna use it and see how they're using it and what's gonna make what's gonna bring the most use for them. Talk to the actual linguist because you know, uh, tech teams and localization teams on the buyer side or in the big TMS, tool companies, they, I feel like, are detached from the actual linguists.
Fair.
And it's very informative to just, watch a linguist work. I was recently in a office full of in-house linguists, and I just asked one of them, she might be watching because we've been chatting after that. Can I just sit behind you for 10 minutes and just watch you? I just want to watch what you do, how you use the tool. First of all, I was blown away by the attention span of that translator, like the ability to focus for such a long time, by the cognitive complexity of the cognitive task she was doing. I was trying to track and it was just too fast for me. Extremely experienced translator. But also then we talked and we talk about how she uses AI in her work. And I realized that, This is a very good idea for a new feature to enhance the cat tool that she's working in, and I'm going to propose it to the team. And it's as simple as that. Sometimes you just sit and watch, and then the best ideas come from that when you
It's
talk to the people in the trenches.
it's so simple. It's so simple, but we don't do it enough, right? So thank you.
Because we don't have access,
True.
because not everybody is lucky enough
Yeah,
to meet a real translator and sit behind her back for 10 minutes and watch.
fair enough.
This is a privilege and a pleasure that not everybody actually has.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, Marina, I'm gonna start wrapping us up here. For those of you out there watching, make sure you check out Marina's piece, generative AI, on generative AI, Ready Set AI. It's available at nimsy.com. You can check it out there. I also highly encourage you to go over to LinkedIn and make sure that you're following Marina, so that, I mean, she's posting regularly with interesting updates out there. And one of the most recent interesting updates, we're kind of talking a little bit about before we went
We
live
can
here.
talk about it here.
Yeah, I want to
Yes.
give you a chance to plug this because it's something that's interesting here. Talk to me about the AI localization think tank.
Oh, I didn't expect you were going to ask that. Well, that's a very new initiative. Actually, it's not so new. It's been around since November last year when Belen from Terra
Shout out.
Translations.
You mean
Yes, shout out to
Belen from
Belen.
Nimsy
Yeah,
is
and Belen from Nimsy, yeah. She came to
Oh,
me at
Belen
a
from Terra.
conference where
Two Belens. Okay, yeah. I'm familiar with both.
I wish there were two Belens. You want to multiply people like Belen. But she came up with, we were talking about the fact that AI is like something to be considered. It's serious. People talk about it. People have different perspectives. There is the fear, there is the optimism, and there is no place where we can have all perspectives represented and discussed in a really safe place. So we organized this think tank. And we invited people who are thought leaders, known people in the industry, and who are also come from diverse areas of the industry. So we have translators, we have buyers, we have providers, all sorts of people, and started talking. And the good thing is that we were discussing issues freely, openly. Nobody was afraid to say what one thinks because it's a nice group of nice people. And then recently, namely last week at Gala, we decided to go public, created this website where we would like to publish content representing all perspectives on AI, talking about the current issues, for monitoring the state of the industry, also podcasts and webinars and interviews with people to represent all sorts of opinion. And together, really the idea is together simply figure it out so that we make that industry a safe place for everybody, so that there are no groups left without a voice.
I love it. Well, a very worthy thing. I'm glad we got the opportunity to give that a shout out. So, if you're out there, you're watching this, it's www.ailocthinktank.com. You can also follow them on LinkedIn. Just search for AI Localization Think Tank, or follow Marina. And then while you're on Marina's page, just follow her link over there. Marina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure to talk to you. I love talking to you because I don't got to say too much. I just got to let you talk, and I can look smart by osmosis just by being in the same room with you. So I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Tucker. It was a pleasure. Looking forward to the next time.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right, I will take us out here today. Ladies, gentlemen, we are out of time for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this Nimsy event series. If you haven't already done so, make sure that you are following Nimsy Insights on LinkedIn so you can be up to date when we schedule new things like this. Also, I would encourage you to go over to Nimsy Insights, check out our case studies page. Go over to see our client testimonials, see exactly what it is Nimsy Insights is doing. We do more than just talk about AI. We do more than just talk about language technology. We help people define their strategy and implement their strategy. Make sure that whether you're on the client side, whether you're in LSP, you're using best practices, up-to-date, innovative best practices for the language services industry. So with that, I will once again say my name is Tucker Johnson from Nimsy Insights, and it's been my pleasure to bring you this live event today, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Cheers.